Hello and welcome to Nigeria, The Road to 2019, a series of programs where Arise News places the audience and the choice at the heart of our coverage of the upcoming presidential elections. I'm Charles Enyekulu. Coming up in the next 30 minutes, all the news, comment and analysis that provide unrivaled insight into Nigeria 2019, including 52 years ago this week in 1966, a group of army officers launched a bloody coup against the civilian government. It marked the start of the military's involvement in Nigerian politics, which would last for decades and set the country on a path to civil war. We speak with the son of Nigeria's first military head of state and get his sense of how the country has evolved politically since then. Now, 52 years ago, on 15th January 1966, a small group of very well-educated Nigerian army officers launched the country's first ever coup, killing many civilian and military leaders. They were impressionable young men who believed things were going terribly wrong in Nigeria. The country was then a federal state with 4 semi-autonomous regions which ran along old political, ethnic and religious fault lines. In the 6 years since Nigeria's independence, the country had seen controversial elections, growing corruption and outbreaks of ferocious political violence. And that was when that group of middle-ranking army officers decided to act. Top army commanders and civilian politicians were murdered, including the Prime Minister Tafawa Balewa. But despite the bloodshed, the number of soldiers involved in the coup proved to be too small for the task. In Lagos, the head of Nigeria's army, Major General Aguiyi Ironsi, escaped the hit squads, mobilized the bulk of the army, and succeeded in putting down the coup. With key civilian leaders dead or missing, the federal government signed over power to General Ironsi. Though not part of the original plot, Ironsi became Nigeria's first military head of state. What's more, General Ironsi and almost all the coup plotters were ethnic Igbos from eastern Nigeria, and almost all those killed were non-Igbos from the north and west. Intentional or not, many saw the coup as part of an ethnically driven conspiracy. It would set Nigeria on a path that would lead to the assassination of General Ironsi 52 years ago this week in a counter-coup led by northern soldiers. Well, General Aguiyi Ironsi's son, Tom, was just 12 years old at the time, and he was with his father when they led him away, never to be seen alive again. Tom went on to represent Nigeria as its ambassador in several postings abroad and would later become, in 2007, President Obasanjo's Minister of Defense. I'm delighted to say that Ambassador Tom Aguiyi Ironsi joins me now in the studio. Thank you very much indeed for coming in. Really honored to have you here. What do you remember of that period?
Thank you very much, Charles, for having me. As you just mentioned, I was 12 years old during that period. But if I look back at the events of 29th July, actually I'd come in from the summer holidays.
You were in boarding school in England,
Yes,
of course.
I'd come in from summer holidays. The day itself, I was with my father in his drawing room in the guest house, and he jokingly told me that there are soldiers surrounding us downstairs.
And that was the guest house in Ibadan.
That's right.
In the military governor of the western region, Fajuyi, that was his house.
That was his house. So he told me that he doesn't know whether they're friendly or not, in a joking manner. And then later proceeded to give me some instructions as to what to do when I got back to Lagos. And then there was a knock at the door, and he told me to stand behind the door because he didn't want anybody to come inside. And from the door, I could hear voices and people saying there's going to be no killing here. And that was the end. So yes, 29 July is an important date in the history of Nigeria, but also January 15th. I'm not here today to open wounds. So first of all, I must say that all those that lost their lives in January and July 1966, may their souls rest in peace.
Amen.
Why I'm here is because of what is happening in the country today.
Well, we're going to get to that, and we're going to have hopefully ample opportunity to discuss that, because your take on that, given the pivotal role that you and your family have played in the evolution of politics in this country, is absolutely crucial. But I just want to go back to that date. You were 12 years old. You've shared some of your memories with us, but just, did your father have any premonition that that was going to be his last day on earth? Did he seem frightened when he was giving you those instructions?
I really don't want to go into too many details.
Right.
Because some of the people who are alive, who can speak better on such matters. But from my perspective, as I said, I was on summer holidays. I came back and he took me on a tour. We went to the north, we went to Benin before we came to Ibadan. As a student of strategic studies, politics, international relations, I've read, I've also done my research. I realized that part of his tour was consultations with the elders in the north, and he had come down to the west to consult with elders in the west. Because, as you mentioned before, there was a lot of distrust that this was an Igbo agenda. And the Northerners insisted that he should consult with them. The Saldana was killed. He brought about much bad blood. The Emir of Sokoto came down to see him, and they said, "You must consult with us." He failed to do that initially, and by the time I came on holiday, he was in the process of trying to make up for that.
So they needed reassurances.
They needed reassurances as to what programs he was going to do, what he was going to do with the soldiers that were locked up who carried out the coup.
And that was part of the anger, wasn't it? That in spite of the fact that he put down that coup, he didn't actually do anything with these soldiers who were essentially, who essentially murdered Nigeria's political elite.
That was it. He was too slow. Nowadays, when people are slow, they say it's a virtue. But at that time, they didn't want things to be slow. He was taking his time. There was also the case of Awolowo. Some people would tell you that he was just about to be released by my father. But these things are, as I said, in the past. We need to look forward.
But it was really just, because the second part of this will look forward, but just to go back to that January 15th, it was the brutality of that coup that really freaked people out, wasn't it? I mean, groups of army officers forming themselves into hit squads to hunt down Nigeria's civilian and military leaders while they slept.
It's terrible. The periods of coup, not only in Nigeria, but in other African countries, were bloody. It's a sad fact. It's a very sad fact. And in fact, the Queen too, when I was presented to her at the Commonwealth Conference in Canada in the 80s, she said it's such a pity that Africa has lost so many good people.
Looking back at that period and what could be considered the heavy reaction of the army to what by today's standards would be mild corruption, let me put it that way. I mean, how does it make you feel today when you see people who, for want of a better term, can be called criminal politicians getting away with corruption?
The issue of corruption is a difficult one. It's cultural in the sense that both Muslims and Christians know that corruption is not good. Why does it come about? There's psychological, societal pressures.
It's kleptomania, isn't it? Keep as much of it in your pocket as possible.
I think it's more than that.
The sense that, there is a certain unpredictability to the future of Nigeria's economy, so stuff your pocket and your guts as much as you can.
No, I think it's more than that. There's plain greed.
Well, that's what I mean. That's exactly it. That's greed.
It's greed.
Yes, I agree. And of course, after 1966, the army took over and would dominate Nigerian politics really up till 1999. I mean, in spite of this small bursts of sort of civilian rule. And many of those young military officers from 1966 are now wealthy grandfathers, still, I mean, wielding enormous influence in Nigerian politics, including, of course, the current president and retired General Muhammadu Buhari, who was one of the officers who took part in that 1966 counter coup when your father died on July 29th.
Yes, yes. July 29th, I lost a caring father who was not able to play with his grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and also missed the opportunity of getting an oil block. Sorry, I apologize for that.
I like that. But then you got the oil block, so everything's fine.
No, I wish President Obasanjo would give me an oil block, but if you know him, you know it's not possible. So, in that respect, on a very serious note, yes, these officers have come up today, but in the Nigeria of today, the Nigeria of the 60s, what was stressed was that we should respect our differences. Nigeria is a complex society, and if we don't respect our differences, things go awry. So, on the anniversary of July 29th, I make a plea for us to respect our differences. Also, this issue of vengeance, reprisal attacks, we have to see an end to that.
Right. I'm going to get to talk about these your sense of the security situation in Nigeria in the second half of this chat, because you were, of course, Minister of Defense in 2007. But I just want to talk a little bit more about those young officers of those days, the ones who lived and who were on the victorious side, if I might put it that way. They've become sort of military kingmakers, because General Obasanjo, who made you his Minister of Defense, one of those retired kingmakers who himself was a former military head of state and later civilian president, was one major factor in President Goodluck Jonathan's election defeat in 2015, when he withdrew his support for Jonathan and instead helped General Buhari to power.
Yes, if you want to talk about the Nigerian military, if we go back to the 60s, we find a cohesive group, people who were their brother's keepers.
Right.
My father, his best friend was General Adebayo, a Yoruba man. Uncle Jack, as I call him, General Gowon, was a regular visitor to the family. Now, over the years, you saw a situation where coups developed. You find it very difficult for officers to go to the mess nowadays to even interact with one another. So things have changed in the military.
Right. Okay, well, we're going to bring things up to date. If you'll stay with us, we're going to take a short break. You're watching Nigeria, the road to 2019. Plenty more still ahead, including more of our chat with the son of Nigeria's first military head of state. And we're getting a sense of how he sees the country and how it's evolved politically since those fateful days of July 1966. Stay with us.
Nigeria. We are 198 million productive people with over 900,000 square kilometers of fertile land. Nigeria's banking system has emerged strong and resilient from the 2016 crisis, which has enhanced our productivity in agribusiness and manufacturing. Come, invest in Nigeria's agribusiness, manufacturing, and value-added mining. Enjoy the Central Bank of Nigeria-led initiatives in funding interventions, stabilized exchange rate, friendly capital repatriation regime, and many more. The Central Bank of Nigeria's robust monetary policy and interventions under President Buhari's administration had positioned the economy to target and attain a GDP growth of 6% with a strong and growing external reserves. Come, invest in Nigeria. Nigeria, ready for business.
There's an old saying in Nigeria, a single tree cannot make a forest. At First Bank, we started from humble beginnings, and with prudent management and bold acquisitions, we have grown to meet the needs of our customers throughout Nigeria and beyond. You first.
Welcome back to Nigeria, the road to 2019. I'm Charles Aniekolu. General Aguiyi Ironsi was Nigeria's first military head of state. His son, Tom, was just 12 years old at the time when his father was led away, never to be seen alive again. Tom went on to represent Nigeria as its ambassador in several postings abroad and would later become, in 2007, President Obasanjo's Minister of Defense. And I'm delighted to say that Ambassador Tom Aguiyi Ironsi is still with me in the studio. Thank you very much indeed for staying with us. And of course, we were talking earlier about President Buhari and the military officers who were part of the coup and counter-coup in 1966, who are now essentially kingmakers in Nigeria. Of course, as a young officer, President Mr. Buhari was among the northern officers who staged the counter-coup that led to your father's sad and rather brutal assassination. Do you hold Mr. Buhari at least partly responsible for your father's death?
Charles, before answering that, just for clarification, I was Nigeria's ambassador to Togo. That's my only ambassadorial posting.
Well, you worked with the foreign service.
I was in the foreign service for 30 years, of course.
Right.
Meant to numerous countries. President Buhari Magaskia is a man of good intentions. He certainly has helped me personally in the past.
Right.
When my Volvo knocked engine. Of course, he didn't give me any money, but he recommended me for a
well, he doesn't
job.
have a reputation for giving people money,
and I'm not from Daura. It still helped me. In those days, going back to when he was a young officer,
right,
I'm sure that we all look back at certain things that we did and said in our earlier days, which we probably regret. In hindsight, my father told me one thing that was embedded in me before he was led away. He said, don't take vengeance. As a 13-year-old boy, 12 years old, I didn't understand why he was telling me don't take vengeance. But it has guided my life in that God is the person that takes vengeance, is in charge. Nobody can command God.
Right.
So all these officers, whatever they did in the past, I'm sure when they are lying on their beds, whether with all the wealth they have, whether they're kingmakers, only they and God knows what they have in mind and what they are sorry for. But as far as President Buhari is concerned, I know that he's a man of good intentions, and I wish him well to go and also have a chance to play with his grandchildren and great-grandchildren.
And do you think that as a result of the Nigerian army's politicized past, that Nigerians today still live with the real or imagined fear that a coup is a possible outcome of any political crisis? And I ask you that not just in the context of your experiences as the son of Nigeria's first military head of state in 1966, but also by the fact that, as a result of the fact that you were at one stage Nigeria's Minister of Defense.
First and foremost, the Nigerian military has been the cement keeping this country together. Unfortunately, in recent times, people have been trying to add too much sand to the cement. And so we see problems going on in the military.
Right.
Now, the military is supposed to be a professional force. It's not supposed to be politicized. It's supposed to be professional and mobile. That is why I keep on insisting that the high command should always go back to former retired generals, call them in for seminars, conferences. Let us have an ongoing defense policy. Let us know what is going on in the Sahara with the Americans, with the French, with the Chinese. We should know what is our national interest. Things are going awry in the military at the present time. The proper structures are not being followed. Recently, 38 officers dismissed without due process. The current Chief of Army Staff is a dynamic officer. And I would hope that he's not being politicized in his actions. That 38 officers, mostly from the South, were just retired. Southeast and South-South.
Well, I haven't got the details of that, but I take what you're saying on board. As you look at Nigeria today, Ambassador, heading towards the 2019 elections, is it your sense that the elaborate power-sharing arrangements in Nigeria's constitution and that unwritten rule known as zoning, which requires the rotation of political power between the North and the South, are legacies of the mistrust engendered in 1966?
Of course, zoning has come about because of mistrust. People will say that we're a young nation. Things cannot be done on merit because things will be given to disproportionately to one particular side.
Right.
Of course, that is the southern side. But increasingly, the North has grown up. Eventually, we're going to have to start to do things on merit. We're going to have to look at this issue of zoning.
So ultimately, your sense is that meritocracy has to be the way forward.
In the future.
Right. You, of course, in addition to serving Nigeria at ambassadorial level, as I mentioned became Minister of Defense under President Obasanjo's government. Given that experience, what are your thoughts on Nigeria's current security situation, and how dangerous do you think that situation is heading into the 2019 general elections?
There are certain things, Charles, I can't discuss when it comes to security. obviously. But you have the saying that security is everybody's baby. Definitely, as we move to 2019, it's going to be a very important year if we get there. Already some American analysts never believed that we would get there.
You said if we get there. Do you share those doubts?
I'm prayerful.
Well, beyond prayer, you're also a pragmatist,
Yes.
having served as an ambassador and a minister of defense. What is your prognosis going forward?
I think President Buhari, in the short time he has been able to be president, has put in place things that should take us to 2019. He has put in place the emphasis on agriculture, the economy is moving forward in the sense that he realizes that without power, without rail, without roads, there's no development. The issue of security, he has an erudite Minister of Interior, and I'm shocked that the Interior Minister has not put in place more policies to increase security. He was Chief of Army Staff. He was the CDS. Part of the insecurity we have in the country is job creation for the youths. Our borders are porous. We can use our youths at the borders. We can use our youths in the states for security. This is a digital age, computer age. We can use drones. We can use cameras. All these the youths can be employed.
Well, that's a very good point. And on that note, I'm going to have to say that we're out of time. Ambassador Tom Aguiyi Ironsi, the son of Nigeria's first military head of state and, of course, Nigeria's former defense minister, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Well, that's it for this edition of Nigeria, The Road to 2019. Join us again for a fresh edition tomorrow. From me and the entire team here in Abuja, bye-bye, and thank you for watching. Absolutely brilliant.